خلاص المهم إنه distinguish the human from other animal. mesoderm is usually form هذه في الهيومن body الconnective tissue, blood cells, muscle, bone. These are what they're responsible for. The endoderm, they usually have the what's really important for them lining of vessel والheart والdigestive system, especially بالheart والdigestive system because they are unique. والإفلك تذكرونها cells layers multi layers. This is what we're really interested in for now. I mean, all of them are very interesting. The ectoderm. The ectoderm form the nervous system. Okay. Well, integument, which is the skin بشكل عام أو أي شيء outside البادي. لأنها related لأنها فيها sensor. Okay, skin to the nervous system or to the nerve will send signals. So this is the one that we really now gonna talk about in very more detail. Bear with me because this part is more confusing, but some people will usually you would need to be flexible to understand it. We have one thing called the nectochord, okay, or the notochord. The notochord is a flexible rod shape body that run along the back of the umbilical or the embryo. It has formed from the mesoderm. Okay, during the third week of gestational تو البيبي تو 3 أسابيع تقريبا, this cord sends signal to the overlapping ectoderm, especially the ectoderm, to include it and it become neuroectoderm. So that's why we are looking at this cord, the notochord. So it sends signals to what? The ecto, okay, to form what? Neuroectoderm. The results usually in strips of neural stem cells لأنها توها إلى الحين ما احنا عارفين what it will look like, that will run along the embryo or the embryo. The strip called, or these strips called the neural plate. And I will show you pictures where it looks easy. And the original of what it has, this plate is originated our whole entire nervous system. سبحان الله, من البرين لين spinal cord لين peripheral nerve system, cranial nerve, all of these we're going to talk about, they form from these basics. It looks basic, but it's very, very complicated. So let's look at the pictures. This is the best pictures we have, but it give you a clear idea because we can draw it. This here, the dorsal view of the horizontal section of the umbilical system, our embryology, okay, or umbilical. What we have primitive strike, this is what will form as النوتوكورد اللي قبل شوي تكلمنا عنه. This is will form later on into notochord. They are stride, okay? So here, if you go into this picture here on the left, what we have, هذا هو النوتوكورد تكلمنا عنه, is this dot. What it will surround, it gives signals to ectoderm اللي قبل شوي تكلمنا عنها اللي هي واحدة من اللايرز, okay? It will become neuroderms, okay? That's what happened. How, you don't need to know it for now, but this is what will actually happen. Next, to form اللي هو neuron plate, we have to do folding, okay? So what will happen? A fold will occur, and this fold we call it the neuron growth. It will give a signal to fold, and these will become the neuron plate. So again, this بالأحمر هنا, this is for the back. A dorsal view of the gestational show of a primitive strike start growing. This will become the human. Primitive strike يعني إلى الحين ما هو فعليا human at 18 days. علشان كذا في بعض اللوز يقول لك انه كان يعني you can انك تسقط الطفل في هذه الفتره when it's not formed yet. just above الدورسال زي ما قلنا النكتوكورد عفوا النوتوكورد the endoderm thicken to form the neuroderms. اوكي جدا بسيطه لكنها just to picture it is very difficult. so من هنا من هذه الصوره اوكي okay let's go back and revise it. Let me erase this. So this is kind of like the difficult, more difficult لأنها صعب إنك to imagine it. It tricky. That's what we mean by it. So I am تونا إلى الحين we have a primitive strike. Okay, that will grow into what we will call an empirical system, البيبي بشكل عام human baby. فهير we have a dorsal view. Okay, من فوق. We will look at what we call a notochord. A notochord, it's a structure. حنشوفها بعدين بصورة واضحة. Okay, this notochord send signals للإكتودورم لأنها الأقرب فعليا لكنها إكتودورم. تذكرون في عندنا 3 layers. Okay, إكتودورم والإندودورم وعندنا الميشوتورم. بينما let me just 1 second go back. قلنا عندنا 3 layers تتذكرونها. we have الميسودورم. هذا الميسودورم إذا تبغون يعني تعرفون النوتوكورد اللي هو الكورد اللي وش نتكلم عنه form from it. لكن don't worry about it for now. Don't get confuse you. الإندودورم هذه we will talk about them in another lectures. We have الإكتودورم. So when we go here عندنا النكتودورم formed from الميسودورم will give signal to the adjacent or nearby endodorm. This endodorm will become cells will become neuroectodorm cells. This is what basically happened. So when this happens, we have to form our the human body will form or embryological baby will form what we call a neuron plate. A neuron plate is folding. So زي ما قلت قبل شوي everything we do في الhuman body is folding خاصة لما نتكلم عن ال development stages. ف what if it will fold okay بسبب ال formation of the nectodorm. it will fold تسحب السيلز على تحت. فهذا الفولدنج حيشكل لي جروف اوكي انحناء عندي هنا ها صح ولا لا في انحناء بسبب الفولد. هذا اللي هنا تحت اللي تشكل من النكتودورم we call it a neuron plate and this is the formation. Let me go and explain this section later. هنا sorry البيكتشر مي واضحة. فالنيورو بليت here أنا نازل هنا في الثالثة أوكي. النيورو بليت شوف it will fold it will give you this section هنا في جزيئات we call it a neural crest and we're going to talk about it more detail later on. Just bear with me with this. So what we have هذا اللي هو اللي قبل شوي البليت it will actually close على عمر 23 يوم تقريبا. هذا الكلوزنس we call it a neural tube. Okay. Next to it we have small neuron cells اللي هي النكتودورم again. These are the crest. So by 18 weeks the neurodorms لأن الحين سميناها neurodorms instead of ectodorms form the neuron plate. The neuron plate become a nervous system, our nervous system. Let me go. It's still difficult here, but this is an explanation. Okay, by 18 weeks نفس الكلام اللي تكلمناه. A neurofolding by 23 will close together or fuse together. And this is what happened, okay, when it's fused together. The notch or the neuron plate has become the neuron tube. Close first in the middle, and this is important because we're going to talk about one condition. So they have a neuron tube it will actually first close at the middle, then superiorly, later inferiorly. آخر شيء inferior. طبعا ليه؟ لأنه الهيومن this is how it will close. Okay, but this is inferior. Okay, this is inferior. This is the back. Okay, هنا الباك لأنه it goes زي ما قلنا along الامبريو. Okay, so this is the back of it. So just know exactly neurotube close first from the middle, then superiorly from above, and then lastly inferiorly. Because one condition we're going to talk about later on relate to this condition. So this is how it looks after the closing of the neuron folding. Some of the زي ما قلنا اللي هي neuroectoderm cells at the later stage or the later edge of the neuron plate will not be incorporated in the neuron tube, so what they will form the neuron crust. فبشكل مختصر if you see بالبيكتشر هنا ها وهذه easier بسبب انها color, you have الectoderm they change into زي ما قلنا بسبب عفوا let's look at this is the nectoderm تحت النكتودرم this is the nectoderm. Okay, هنا ها it will formulate تسوي اللي هي الفولدنج will occur. Okay, طيب when we have this folding هذا نسميه البليت النيرون بليت. النيرون بليت next to it عندنا cells it did not formulate اللي هو التيوب هذا التيوب الكامل, and this one we call it التيوب نيرون تيوب. بينما هذه الجزيئات أو السيلز البسيطة they are the crest, the neuron crest. We will talk about why they are important next. So here is a clear picture of how it looks like. بالبداية مسطح عادي. اوكي هنا ها في عندنا جروف بسيط. اوكي هذا الجروف. اوكي هنا ها this is now we can call this here is a plate. This is the plate. واضح؟ فhere it's very clear identify هذا البليت identify. Next to it هذا الكريست neural crest, I should say neural crest. Now it closed and it become the tube, neuron tube. Okay, neural tube. The crest next to it. واضحة؟ Or it's still confusing? هي شوي confusing لكن you need to repeat and understand it because you need to memorize the stages. لا. It will give you a clear idea later on when you go. Let's look at this. This is الامبرو بشكل عام جدا صغير. We have فوق what we call crest, and this is على سبيل المثال الكيديول. Where is the netocor? Okay, we're gonna talk later. الحين احنا نتكلم على الى الحين ما تشكل الانفنت فوي كانت سي لانه كلها راح تتغير بعدين حتشوفون وش اللي بيصير فيها, لكن تقصدها الحين عبد الله we don't look at it now لانه هالحين احنا نتكلم على ستيج بالامبيريكال ستيج ف it will become different, so I will show you now. اذا جاوبت سؤالك let me know. عفوا عادي اذا ما جاوبت ارجع اسالني. ف this is how it looks. This is the fold again, neuron fold. This is the groove as we say, وهذا الكريست وهذا التيوب. Okay, this is the again natural tube at about the end of the third week. We still they still not develop as a full-term infant. Neuron folding begin to fuse at usually the clavicle level of the future spinal cord. A cross section shows how it looks like. So let me tell you what they look like. The tube, they actually become our central nervous system. That include the spinal cord or the brain. The crest, it becomes the PNS, peripheral nervous system, with some exceptions, and we're going to talk about the exception. الكورد اللي هو النوتروكورد، and هذا سؤال عبد الله، it become الانترفيرتيكال عفوا هاي زين intervertebral disc اللي هي الفقرات العظميه والفنتركلز في البرين، and we're going to talk about this بالمحاضره الثانيه. وهذا يجاوب سؤالك عبد الله. فالتيوب will become ال CNS، الكورد اللي هو النوتوكورد will become ال intervertebral disc، والكريست will become ال PNS اللي هي peripheral nervous system. So again, this is when we look at خاصة عند البيولوجي ما عندنا شيء اسمه posterior anterior، عندنا شيء اسمه caudal وعندنا شيء rostral. Okay, this is above and below, that's what we mean. Okay, لكن ما عندنا لأنه إلى الحين ما تشكل الرأس، ما تشكل هذه الأشياء اللي هي الانatomical structure, and we could distinguish between them. this is what we have caudal. الكيدل يطلع على سبيل المثال عندنا أعلى، بينما الروستر اللي هي تحت. again with picture A الميسو okay derm والendo. الendo, this is the endoderm, and mesoderm is inside. So what they will form? They will form al cord, not a cord. Okay, this will become a natural neural plate, and this is the ectoderm here. هذا الاكتودورم اللي راح تتحول بعدين. الاندودورم ما راح يتحول فيها شيء. الميسودورم راح تشكل لي الكورد. here we have a natural fold. You can see this is a cross section B، هذا الفولد وهذا الجروف كالمنحنى. again عندي هنا ها الكورد، وعندي هنا ها تحولت من اندو لايش؟ اندوديرم. شو نسميها الحين؟ شو نسميها؟ نيرو اندوديرم سيلز. اوكي، فتشينج النيمز لانها send signals لها. This is again now we form a tube, neural tube. Next to it we have a symmetric. You don't need to worry about it now. هذه هنا ها الكريست here and here، وهذا التيوب دي. طيب clinical relevance again، إذا ما صار في closing we call it closing، خاصة في ال inferiorly آخر شيء، لأنه التيوب يبدأ بالبداية middle بعدين زي ما قلنا superiorly، ولكن آخر شيء inferiorly will not close. What happened? This is normal development for an infant. This baby is not fully developed because their part of their brain is missing. Okay, we call it one of the spinal bifida condition, and we're going to talk about them in detail. Here we have a closing لكنها outside of اللي هو الاريا اللي supposed to be خارج السباين، خلينا نقول اللي هي will develop as a spine. فإذا كان closing outside we have spinal bifida. You see هذه الزيادة، هذه spinal bifida it needs surgery, immediate surgery. اوكي، لأنها فيها infection والله، وفيها بونز بعض الأحيان، وفيها على سبيل المثال اللي هي CFS fluid، فنيد سيرجري على حسب، راح نتكلم عنها بمادة البيدياتريك in detail. But this will give you an indication how the neurological system or the empirical neuron system is related to what we actually look for or what we actually do. واضح؟ I will give you 10 minutes also for me to prepare the next slides، منها تراجعون وتعطوني إذا في سؤال. So we'll start at 8:40. Okay، اللي هي المحاضرة السكشن الثاني. It should be an easy section. But let me know if you have any question. I'm still here. I will remove the slides بعد 5 minutes and add the other slides later on. Any question let me know. إذا أحد يبغى يتكلم في المايك feel free. I will mute myself now. Okay, are we ready to go back and continue? So we're gonna talk now about how what we just discussed become formed into our brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system. So let's get started and talk about how actually we develop our how our how the development of our central nervous system, especially the the two spinal cord and the brain, and how the development of the peripheral nervous system occur. So again, we're just as a very small review of what we just talked about. Neural tube become central nervous system, and neural crust will become the PNS, اللي هي peripheral nervous system. So now let's talk about the central nervous system. We're going to talk about the spinal cord, how it actually formate. So spinal cord comes from our neural tube. The lateral wall of the spine thicken and produce a very small lamin or cells they call this is the central canal إذا تتذكرون في الاناتومي, which run a full length of the cord. So the lateral wall will form thick cells or lamin, and they are called the central canal. They run fully through the whole cord. In the brain, the central canal become the ventricle system. Okay, we have four. Both the central canal and the ventricle system are continuous at the level of the megal formation or megal foramen, where the fourth ventricle continue with the central canal. يعني آخر شيء في الدماغ مع بداية السباينال كورد. That's we call it المينجون أو الميجانال foramen, and this is the location of the fourth ventricle of the brain and the central canal. So what we have in the brain, the central canal will become a ventricle system. In the spinal cord, they are still the central canal. Okay, واضح? Yep, should be easy. So what we have here, this اللي هي ال salus, okay, we have it divided into two portions. We have the basal, we have the alar plate. Above and below, that's what we usually refer to them. What we have inside the alar plate, tube, rooftop, we have a dorsal aspect. They actually form the structure of the sensory function. So what they actually formate هذا spinal cord again, the dorsal horn, the current dorsal horn. بينما البasal plate, they are the ventral aspect. They form the motor structure resulting from the motor function. They are the ventral horn. So we have dorsal, ventral, a dorsal responsible for sensory, a ventral responsible for motor. A dorsal come from the dorsal aspect. The dorsal aspect is related to the alar plate. بينما ventricle, it become from the ventricle aspect, and it actually developed from the basal plate. So this is in fourth week gestational age. The neural tube cells growth and differentiation. We call it differentiation لأنه هنا يصير في يبدأ الاختلاف. في الفلور, this is the floor and this is the roof. Again, this section here اللي هو الانقسام, تذكرون في البرين أو المكان الجروف اللي هي الانحناءات. This is the sulcus. The sulcus limitation. Okay. These actually divided into basal section, alar section, above and below. Okay. we're gonna talk about later the layers. هذه اللي هي بالداخل الفنتركل او الكنال. طبعا هنا لانها بدايتها يحدث اول شيء الفورميشن للفورث فنتركل في البرين، وبعدين ينزل ويصير سنترال كانال. اوكي واضحه ولا لا؟ hopefully it's clear. yeah تسمعوني؟ can you hear me? hello موجودين؟ anyway yeah. So this is the typical spinal cord. We're going to talk more in detail على spinal nerve later on, but just to give you an indication, we have what we call sensory and then the motor unit. Okay, dorsal and ventral. Okay, horn, زي sections. Okay, so this is the posterior, this is the sensory usually. هذه هي sensory nucleus, and this is the motor. So we have dorsal, we have ventricle. Okay, the dorsal sensory, the ventricle is ventricle where it's located to the motor neuron. We're not going to talk about this how they actually develop, because I think we have a complete lecture about the neuron development. لكن بشكل مختصر sensory feedback يجي هنا ها يروح efferent و afferent تذكرون. We have both ways. They go into the posterior root لأنه posterior is related to the sensory. We have the ganglia تذكرون مجموعة الcells, and they actually spinal nerve. So it give ما عندنا spinal nerve واحد مخصص للموتور واحد للsensory, لكن they divide here. So here we have a lateral horn, and this is the automatic motor neurons. This is the anterior root, and it goes here, and it gives a combination of all of this: somatic, vesicular, sensory, automatic, somatic motor. And we're going to talk about them really in big detail. This is the anterior horn, and this is the posterior. Usually posteriorly we look at sensory, anteriorly we look at motor neurons. جدا باختصار لأنه we're going to talk about them later on. Yes, but then the umbilical or the umbilical wall of the spinal cord is developed into a very 3 layers. We have 3 layers through them. The ventricle zone, this is one, the marginal zone, and then the mental zone. And either you can call them zone or layer. It depends on how you view them, but I usually call them zone. So here we have how they look like now. So we've got neuron tube. This is complete neuron tube. This is the dorsal. Okay, قبل شوي تكلمنا والventricle. Okay, we have the first. This is what we call اللي هي ventricle zone. They are the first to form. They are the innermost layer in general. They are surrounded by the central canal. What their function, and it's really critical, they produce neurons والتذكرون هذه الاستروسايتس cells والأولي golden sites cells. okay, أو gala, because إنها ليه؟ لأنها تعتبر associated nearby أو supporting cells إذا تذكرون في المحاضرة اللي قبل. ف we have هذه هي ventricle or the abdominal layer. This is the basal, and this is the sulc, and this is the altar. تذكرون هذا راح يسوي وشو sensory، وهذا هنا راح يسوي motor. لكن ventricle will produce neurons, these cells، لأنها it relate to the central nervous system. إذا تذكرون هذه supporting cells, they are in the central nervous system. So margin or margin cell, this is the ventricle layer. Okay, what we have a margin layer هذا اللي هنا هذا الداخلي. Okay, الventricle أقرب شيء the upmost. So they are the second to form. So again, تذكروا ما قلت لكم الhuman body folding, one fold, we have another fold now with the marginal zone. The outmost of the three layer, they usually اللي هو أبعد شيء ممكن تلقاه لأنها بعيدة، لأنه بعد شوي حنناظر على اللاير الثالث ونشوف وينه. Formed when the outer portion of the ventricle zone they differentiate and cellular process of the neuron displace later. زي ما صار إنه كل ما يصير عندي النيورونز هنا تكثر في الventricle layer, it will formulate what we call marginal. They actually become a white matter of the spinal cord, and this is really, really important. It's the white matter of our spinal cord. They are what we call an aclear layer, and we're going to talk about what we mean by that later on in the semester. آخر شيء اللي هي mental zone. This is the third layer. If you see هذه الventricle جدا داخلية upmost, المارجن هنا matter is here. It's surrounded by dots, so we will know what these dots are. This is the crest تتذكرون. This is the tube. Okay, كل هذا التيوب. This is again الventral, and this is the dorsal. So this is the third layer. They are in the middle layer. They located between the ventricle and the margin layer, of course, obviously, due to their proliferation of neuroplasticity, or what we call immature neurons. And neurons, they don't develop into it form of the ventricle layer. So لأنه بسبب إنه في بعض النيورونز will not develop properly, they will formulate this cushion layer or in the middle layer. Okay, these include neuron of the ventral and the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. However, they are the gray, okay, matter, not the white matter. The motor neuron of the ventral horns, the interneurons between the ventral and the lateral, and also the projection neurons of the dorsal. Don't worry so much about what we mean by this, because في محاضرات هتكلم عن spinal cord كاملة وراح نشرح هذه الأشياء. لكن just know in detail إن عندي 1, 2, 3 layer. The first is ventricle. What they do, actually they produce the neurons واللي تكلمنا عنها الcells. Margin اللي هي sorry, in the middle is the white. However, you have to have green matter and between the ventricle and the dorsal horn, and these are usually by the mental zone it happens. And they actually also have the motor neurons, the motor neurons اللي هي connection between the ventricle and the lateral, and the projection fiber, or projection, not fiber, neurons usually here we call them in the dorsal horn. طيب المايكروجيلا cells تذكرونها واحدة من الcells, how they are formulate. Usually these cells زي ما قلنا come from the meso. Okay, there. These cells which surround the central nervous system, these cells enter the spinal cord and the brain with the development of the blood vessels. Hence why they are really close to the blood supply. إذا تذكرونها هذه في المحاضرة اللي أخذناها قبل. قلنا عندنا أنواع supporting cells, and these are the one. هذه في central nervous system. Okay. بينما spinal cord meningi اللي هو زي السائل, we have dora matter. They are formated from the mesoderm. الدورة اللي هي layers لها. الإكرودوم والبايا matter, they came from the crest. And neuron crest من الإكتودوم. Just know where they are from. This is memorizing. You have to know exactly where they are. لأنه عندنا 3 layers في السباينال كورد زي البرين. الدورة تذكرونها والباي تكلمنا عنها في أول محاضرة هذه. Myelination, the function is to unshield the axon. زي ما قلنا هذا المyelination of the neuron of the connection layer of the myelin. طبعا through phospholipid. They begin about 4.5 months into gestational age عفوا into gestation and lasts through the first postnatal year. Okay, يعني بعد عمر سنة تقريبا بعد الولادة we still have myelination usually in the brain. However, and the brain عفوا in the brain at birth myelination is limited. بعد ما يولد الطفل المyelination become limited to very few years of the brain. The brain will not myelinate easily. يعني على سبيل المثال أعطيكم مثال outside لكنه just feel relevant. أو نناظر على الإيميجينج حقت الانفنت البيبيز، نتكلم على انفنت تو مولود أوكي تيرم تو يعني بداية ولادته، أو نتكلم على واحد عمره 25 سنة الأرقام تختلف عندنا. إذا إنه صار تسهيل على سبيل المثال وجود الأكسجين is different than what we have from 25 years old person. لأنه السبب إنه في الانفants we still have this myelination stage and we expect them to myelinate. هذه في البرين. Okay. Are you with me ولا سويت confusing كثير لكم؟ في confusion كثير؟ I believe so. طيب تمام انه ما في confusion. طيب myelination of the brain, the timing. I'm not going to talk about the timing, but I'm just going to show you the direction. Direction usually from here to here. Okay, يطلع from back to front. سبحان الله. علشان كذا تتذكرون في الديفلوبمنت ما ادري اذا درستوها ولا لا، يقول لك اخر شيء myelinated هذا. وشو هذا؟ مين يتذكر؟ مين يذكر السكشن وش اسمه؟ frontal lobe. اوكي and this section بالذات نسميه prefrontal lobe. هذا اول شيء. فهذا مسؤول عن ايش؟ الجادجمنت. عشان كذا الاطفال الصغار اللي عمره 6 7 سنوات 8 سنوات you will not judge them. يعني على سبيل المثال انه والله ما صلى ما تضربه ما تسوي هذه الاشياء، او خلينا نقول على سبيل المثال اذا سوى شيء you don't ما توبخه بشكل كبير لانه هذه is not developed by 18 17 16 years of age. this will طبعا شكلها develop بس I mean myelinated. اوكي ما هي بالبرين، البرين fully developed اوكي اول ما ينولد الطفل، لكن ما فيها myelination enough to formate a connection. فذاتس what we mean انها تروح من posteriorly to anteriorly from down to up او caudal to restro, and we're going to talk about how they are. So they actually go from the middle brain to above to the projector fibers. فعلى سبيل المثال هنا يبدا من الهايبوكامبس وال you send signals للموتور اوكي pathway. الموتور pathway the baby will can reach, the baby will stand, the baby will walk. All of this require fibering here, myelination here. Okay, that's why it looks like this. This is the timing and the direction. طيب again we have بالmyelination we talked about what myelinate الcentral والperipheral تتذكرونها. this oligoandria gala, this is in the central nervous system. Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. They are responsible for myelination of the central nervous system. They came from the ventral layer, okay, the ventricle layer of the neuron tube. بينما Schwann cells زي ما قلنا they are responsible for myelination of the peripheral nervous system. They come from the neuron crust. تتذكرون أي شيء له related لل PNS peripheral nervous system it comes from a neuron crust. واضح؟ It's different than what we have from the central nervous system because this comes from the ventral layer. نرجع نعيدها وشوفوها هنا ها. It's easy لأنه قبل شوي تكلمنا على الفانكشن حقتها. Here you see what the ventricle zone produce. One of these is the cell. Okay. طيب البرين this is شوية complicated لأنه شكله غريب ف how we imagine it is different. We have rosal end of the neuron tube undergoes rapid change. الرosal اللي هو تحت يعتبر okay rostal عفوا. About 28 days the neuron tube formates 3 primary section or vesicle let's call it الفرونتال الميد والهندر برين اوكي زي ما تقول الفرونت والميدل والباك. By 35 days the frontal or front brain and the hinder brain they separate and become 2 vesicular each. Let's look at them now. Terminology usually البرو cephalin is the frontal or front tube. المينو cephalin is the mid, and then the rhympo cephalin is the hinder. بينما underneath الفرونتال we have an end brain والinner brain. We have the Tillin cephalin, we have the Dyson-cephalin. Mesencephalin is the same. بينما under the lymph system we have the metacephalin, which is the cerebellum and the bones تحت. بينما المyelencephalin is the medulla oblongata. So this is the terminology because we go on back and forth between them. So again, here the most front brain, and we call it procephalin, mid brain, and then the hinder brain or the reference system. Okay, and this is our spinal cord. This is by 28 weeks, 28 days. Again, this is how it looks: the frontal lobe, the procephalin, the minicephalin, and then the rhympocephalin. And this end is the spinal. So تذكران caudal تحت rostral فوق. Here we have the same division, but we have flex. So it become formate now. We have mid brain زي البوينت لاينز زي الحدود تتقطع. We have a point line here وهنا ها الميد brain اوكي وهنا ها الكيرفيكال. ليه؟ لانه السباينال كورد والكات هير يبدا. فعندي تذكرون C1 C2 C3 اللي هي C1 C2 C3 اللي هي السباينال كورد اوكي. فعندي 2 sections here في البرين, 1 section between the brain and the spinal cord. فاجين هذا يتكون ويصير الفرونت. This is the middle here, وhere is the hinder brain, وهنا ها يقطع السباينال كورد. اوكي يصير 2 atmosphere عفوا 2 sections again. التلا هذا الفرونتال brain. We have telephone vehicles which is 2. We have the diaphragm. تذكرون diaphragm وشو؟ الهيبوكامبس والهايبوكامبس. Okay, الميد brain والهند brain here. Again, you start from 25 days. Subhanallah, you start with forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Again, in 40 days, you start to have a spinal cord development, عمر 40 يوم تقريبا. And then by 50 days, you start to see hemispheres development. Okay, اللي هو cerebral hemispheres. بينما على 100 يوم you see cerebellum, البونز والميدلا oblongata. عمر 100 يوم تقريبا. 5 شهور يكون كامل by 9 months اللي هي تتذكرون التجعدات هبن اللي هي الكراست فيها. فأجين هذه على سبيل المثال الكراست واللي فيها تحدث. طبعا بشكل مختصر إذا تذكرون medulla oblongata, bones, all of this is the brain, and all of this is the cerebellum, and this is the cerebrum. Okay, we have two hemisphere لها and goes back and right and left. A peripheral nervous system is different because it came or it developed from the neuron crust. Okay, with some exceptions to it. So peripheral nervous system produced زي ما قلنا from the neuron crust. Recall they are made of إذا تتذكرون 12 kernel nerve. We're going to talk about them later on. لكن أنا عارف إنكم درستوها شوي بسيط في البيولوجي لكن we're going to talk about them later on. 31 pairs of spinal nerve of the automatic nervous system إذا تتذكرون sympathetic و parasympathetic nervous neurons أو neurons nerves. Again هذه الصورة شرحناها قبل شوي. We have زي ما قلنا let's talk posterior, anterior. Posterior we have the sensory وال intraneurons بالذات بينما الانتيريور we have the somatic motor. هنا ها النيوكليوس للسنسري وهنا ها الموتور. We have somatic, vascular, automatic and somatic في الموتور. Here اللي هي الهورن, this is the lateral horn we have. بينما من ال posterior horn we have a root, that's the posterior sensory root, and this is the ganglia. And from the motor, the lateral horn, we have the anterior root, which is carrying motor signals back and forth, and then the spinal nerve. A spinal nerve have both sensory and motor, and it divided later on. They produce from all produce from neuron cells all sensory of the PNS plus Schwann cells, and they are significantly important. إذا تتذكر myelination والautomatic ganglia. طبعا, however, there is an important point. The motor only neurons of the peripheral nerve have their cells body located in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and thus they are the produce of the tube. Just this one aspect only. It produced from a neuron tube. What they are? Motor neurons. Motor neurons, specifically, when we talk about a peripheral nervous system, they are the only exception that they can be produced from the neuron tube because they are located in the ventral horn. إذا شفتوها في spinal cord here, the ventral horn. واضح? This is the only exception. All of the PNS is actually originated from the neuron crust or neural crust. واضح؟ Is this clear? لأنه هنا ها عندكم اللينكس. I would recommend فعليا في السباينال كورد عفوا CNS اليوتيوب الثاني هذا, وفي البرين اليوتيوب الثاني أفضل. اللينك الثاني أحسن من الأول كpictures. We're not gonna go through it. This is for you to look at and distinguish and investigate and enhance your knowledge through it. حد عنده سؤال أو استفسار؟ Okay, if no one have any question, feel free to leave, and please remember to attend the workshop today. It will be done by Mr. Jaya for the conference. Okay, good luck and have a good day. Goodbye.